I just faced a veteran's worst nightmare. The HOA president just threw my mail straight into the trash, including my VA disability checks. And her excuse? She said my mailbox wasn't community approved. Funny thing is, the only approval she ended up needing that day was bail from county lockup. Let me start from the beginning. The first time I laid eyes on Karen, I knew. Some people give off a bad vibe. She gave off a full-blown, Category 5 hurricane of misery. It was our first week in the new house, and I was on the front lawn trying to teach Max, my old German shepherd, that our new yard was his new kingdom. He was sniffing a rosebush Mary had planted like it held the secrets to the universe. I was just enjoying the quiet. For a guy like me, quiet isn't just an absence of noise, it's a destination. It's the place you spend years dreaming of when you're surrounded by the loudest sounds a man can hear. The sun was warm, the air smelled like cut grass and hope, and for a minute, I let my guard down. That was my first mistake. A golf cart, the electric kind that sneaks up on you, whined to a stop at my curb. Behind the wheel was a woman with a haircut you could use as a straight edge and eyes that looked like they'd been borrowed from a hawk that just missed its lunch. "Excuse me," she said. The words were polite. The tone was not. It was the kind of tone that suggested I was tracking mud on her solid gold floors. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Karen Blake, the president of the Homeowners Association." She said president like she was announcing her divine right to rule this little patch of suburban paradise. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. Max let out a low grumble, and I put a hand on his back. He's a better judge of character than I am, and he had Karen pegged from 100 feet away. "Jack," I said, "just moved in." I didn't offer a last name. In my old line of work, you learn to give out information on a need-to-know basis. I decided she didn't need to know. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, but her eyes weren't welcoming. They were scanning, cataloging, judging. They swept over my lawn, my porch, and finally landed on the small flagpole I had just installed next to the door. It held the American flag. "There's a problem with your decoration." I looked at the flag, then back at her. "It's the flag of the United States of America," I said, my voice flat. Not really a decoration, more of a statement of allegiance. A tight, unpleasant smile played on her lips. According to the HOA bylaws, all exterior attachments, including flagpoles, must be approved by the committee. The flagpole you've installed is 2 inches taller than the regulated height. She held up a tiny measuring tape like it was Exhibit A at trial. Furthermore, the flag itself can only be displayed on designated federal holidays. It's June. Today is not a holiday. I just stared at her. I've had people shoot at me. I've had to make decisions that kept me awake for a decade. And this woman, in her beige polo shirt and perfectly creased shorts, was telling me I had an illegal flag. The absurdity of it was so massive, I almost laughed. But I didn't. I saw the look in her eyes. This wasn't about a rule. This was about power. It was her testing the fences, seeing if the new guy was a sheep or a wolf. My wife, Mary, came out the front door, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She saw the golf cart and the woman with the angry haircut, and her smile faltered. Mary is tough, tougher than me in a lot of ways, but she has a default setting of kindness that I've always admired. It takes a lot to switch it off. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes moving between me and Karen. Karen gave Mary a look that was even more dismissive than the one she'd given me. She sized her up in a half second and wrote her off. Another mistake. "I was just informing your husband," Karen said, emphasizing the word like it was an accusation, "about the violation." Mary looked at the flag, then back to Karen. "The flag? What's wrong with it?" "It's in violation of Section C, Paragraph 4 of the Community Guidelines," Karen chirped, clearly pleased with her own memory. "He has 24 hours to remove it, or he'll be issued a $100 fine." I felt that old heat creep up the back of my neck, the kind of anger I'd worked so hard to control. It was a physical thing, a switch that flipped. I could feel my jaw tighten. Max felt it too and stood up, placing himself between me and the golf cart. He didn't bark. He didn't have to. The message was clear. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I served 2 tours under that flag. It's not a decoration and it's not coming down. Not yesterday, not today, not ever. So, You can take your little rule book and your little golf cart and drive right back to whatever joyless corner of this neighborhood you crawled out of." Her face went pale, then a blotchy red. For a second, she looked like she might actually explode. The mask of calm suburban authority slipped, and I saw the real person underneath. A nasty, entitled bully who was furious that someone had finally said no. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," she hissed. She slammed the golf cart into reverse, the electric motor whining in protest, and she slammed the golf cart into reverse, whining off with as much fury as an electric cart can muster. Mary put a hand on my arm. "Jack," she said softly, "you can't just—" "I can, Mary. I did," I said, my eyes still fixed on the retreating golf cart. "Some lines you don't let people cross." She squeezed my arm, a silent signal that she was with me, even if she thought I was being a hothead. She knew what that flag meant to me. She knew the ghosts I lived with and the promises I'd made. We stood there for a long time, watching until the golf cart disappeared around a corner. The quiet I'd been enjoying was gone. It had been replaced by something else, the feeling of an incoming storm. I knew, right then and there, that this was just the beginning. This woman wasn't going to stop with a fine. She wanted a war. What she didn't know was, I was the last person on earth you wanted to start a war with. We didn't choose Willow Creek because it was fancy. We chose it because it was supposed to be the end of the line, the final stop. For years, my life had been a series of temporary addresses on military bases, dusty apartments in foreign countries, and hospital rooms that all smelled the same, like antiseptic and quiet desperation. Every time I deployed, I'd promise Mary the same thing. "When this is over," I'd say, "we're going to find a little house with a big yard, a place so quiet you can hear the grass grow. No more packing boxes, no more goodbyes." It was the dream that got us through. It was the anchor in the storm of my career. After my last tour, the one that left me with a permanent limp and a head full of static, the doctors told me I was done. Honorably discharged, they said. A hero. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a machine that had finally run out of parts. All I wanted was that quiet house. We spent months looking. We wanted a place with good bones, a community where people waved when you drove by, a yard big enough for Max to chase squirrels in his old age. When our realtor showed us the house on Maple Lane, it felt right. It was a simple 2-story, a little worn around the edges, but solid. It had a big oak tree in the front yard and a back porch that overlooked a small, shimmering pond. "This is it, Jack," Mary had said, her eyes shining. "This is the place." She could already see it. She saw gardens and bird feeders and years of peaceful mornings with coffee on that back porch. I saw it too. I saw a place where I could finally unpack my bags for good. A place where the loudest sound would be the wind in the trees. We sank every penny we had into that house. My disability pay, Mary's savings from her years of teaching, everything. It was our bet on a peaceful future. For the first couple of weeks, it was everything we dreamed of. We painted the living room a soft yellow that Mary loved. I spent my days fixing leaky faucets and patching drywall, the simple, honest work feeling like a kind of therapy. In the evenings, we'd sit on the back porch and watch the fireflies blink over the pond. Max would lay his head on my lap, and I'd feel the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for 20 years finally start to unwind. We were healing. Then came Karen and her flag crusade. After our first run-in, I got my first official letter. It was printed on thick, expensive paper and smelled faintly of her perfume. It detailed my infraction in cold legal language and informed me that a $100 fine had been added to my monthly HOA dues. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. This was my hill. I was ready to die on it. A few days later, I met my next-door neighbor, Derek. He was watering his petunias when I was out getting the mail. Derek was a tall, gangly guy with glasses that were always a little crooked and a smile that seemed permanently fixed to his face. He looked like a human golden retriever. "Hey there," he said, beaming. "You're the new guy. I'm Derek. Welcome to the neighborhood." His enthusiasm was a little overwhelming, but it was genuine. We chatted for a bit, the usual new neighbor stuff. Then he leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. "Listen, man," he said, "I saw your disagreement the other day with Queen Karen." He snorted. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. She's a piece of work." I raised an eyebrow. "So I gathered." "No, you don't get it," he said, his smile vanishing for a second. "She's not just a stickler for the rules, she lives for this stuff. My cousin had to take down his kid's basketball hoop because it was, and I quote, aesthetically displeasing. The Miller family 2 streets over had to repaint their entire house because their shade of beige was 2% off the approved shade of beige." He shook his head. "She gets a weird thrill out of it. Be careful, man. She holds a grudge like it's an Olympic sport." That conversation stuck with me. It confirmed what I already suspected. Karen wasn't just an overzealous volunteer. She was a predator, and our peaceful little neighborhood was her hunting ground. The fines kept coming. A letter about the grass being 1/4 of an inch too high. A notice that the welcome mat Mary had bought was a non-approved color. A warning that Max, when he was in our own fenced-in backyard, had been heard barking at an unacceptable volume. Each letter was a small escalation, a little jab designed to get under my skin. I knew what she was doing. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Wear them down. Make their life so miserable they either fall in line or leave. Mary was getting stressed. She'd check the mail with a sense of dread. "This isn't what we wanted, Jack," she'd say, her voice tight with worry. "I just wanted peace." Her words hit me harder than any fine from Karen ever could. This woman wasn't just attacking me. She was stealing the dream I had promised my wife. She was poisoning our sanctuary, and that was something I could not and would not allow. I realized this wasn't going to be a simple war of attrition. To protect our peace, I was going to have to go on the offensive. Karen Blake had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had made it personal. The final straw wasn't a letter. It was a ramp. Max is 14, ancient in German Shepherd years. His back legs are shot. Some days he can barely make it up the 3 steps from the back porch to the yard. Watching him struggle was like a knife in my gut. He'd been with me through everything, the lonely nights on base, the long recovery after I was injured. He was more than a dog. He was my partner. So I spent a weekend building him a ramp. It wasn't fancy, just a simple, sturdy wooden ramp, low to the ground, with non-slip treads so he could get in and out of the yard without pain. The first time he used it, he walked down it, sniffed around the grass, then looked back at me and gave a little wag of his tail. It was the best I'd felt in weeks. For 2 days, things were quiet. I watched from the kitchen window as Max used his ramp, a small measure of dignity restored to his old age. The mail was sacred to me. Years overseas taught me the value of every letter. I should have known it wouldn't last. On the 3rd day, the golf cart appeared at my curb again. This time, Karen wasn't alone. She had a passenger, a large, beefy man with a shaved head and a sour expression who looked like he'd been carved out of a block of concrete. He was her muscle, her enforcer. I met them on the lawn before they could even knock on my door. Mary watched from the window, her hand pressed against the glass. "Mr. Jack," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have another violation to discuss." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. "An unapproved structural addition to your property." "It's a dog ramp," I said, crossing my arms. "For my old dog." "All exterior additions, even temporary ramps, must be submitted for architectural review," she recited, like a robot. "You failed to do so. The ramp must be removed immediately." The big guy took a half step forward, a clear attempt at intimidation. I didn't even look at him. My eyes were locked on Karen. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us. Karen's smile vanished. "I'm not asking," she said, her voice turning hard. "I'm telling you, it's a violation, it's an eyesore, and it's coming down. If you don't remove it by tomorrow morning, the HOA will have it removed for you, and you will be billed for the labor." I felt that switch flip again, the anger rising hot and fast. But this time, I held it in check. Losing my temper was what she wanted. It would make me look like the unreasonable one. I needed to be smarter than that. "It's a temporary ramp for my disabled veteran service animal," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you're required to provide reasonable accommodation. Denying him access to the yard could be seen as a violation of federal law." I had skimmed enough of the ADA website that morning to know ramps qualified, though I prayed she didn't test me. I was bluffing mostly. I didn't know the exact legal ins and outs, but it sounded official enough to give her pause. For a split second, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by smug arrogance. "A dog is not a person," she sneered. "The ADA does not apply to your pet's accessories. Remove the ramp. This is your final warning." She and her goon got back in the golf cart and drove off, leaving me standing in the middle of my lawn, shaking with a rage so pure it felt like electricity. It wasn't about the ramp anymore. It was about cruelty. It was about a woman so drunk on her tiny sliver of power that she'd target a sick old dog just to prove a point. I went back inside, and Mary met me at the door. Her face was pale. "What are we going to do, Jack?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't just let them, can we?" I looked past her, through the house to the backyard, where Max was sleeping in a patch of sun at the bottom of his new ramp. He looked peaceful. He looked happy. In that moment, something inside me settled. The hot anger cooled into something harder, something more focused. Cold resolve. This was no longer a defensive action. This was no longer about protecting a flagpole or a welcome mat. This was about right and wrong. It was about decency. I turned back to Mary and took her hands in mine. "No," I said, my voice steady. "We're not going to let them. This stops now." She looked at me, searching my eyes. She saw the soldier in me, the part I usually tried to keep hidden from her. But she also saw the husband who had made her a promise. "How?" she whispered. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do," I said. "I'm going to gather intelligence. I'm going to identify the enemy's weaknesses. And then I'm going to dismantle her, piece by piece." I let go of her hands and walked over to my desk, pulling out a fresh legal pad and a pen. I wrote her name at the top, Karen Blake. It was no longer a disagreement. It was a mission, and I would not fail. The war had been declared, and I was about to fire the first real shot. My first step was reconnaissance. In the Army, you learn that you don't engage an enemy until you know everything about them, their routines, their strengths, their weaknesses. Karen Blake was now my target, and I was going to map out her entire life. I started simple. Observation. I'd get up before dawn, the habit of 20 years in uniform being hard to break, and I'd sit in my darkened living room with a pair of binoculars and a cup of black coffee. I watched her house across the street. I noted what time she got her newspaper, what time she left in her golf cart to begin her daily reign of terror, what time the landscapers, who only ever seemed to work on her lawn, came and went. It was boring, meticulous work, but it was necessary. I was building a pattern. Mary thought I was losing my mind. "You're spying on the crazy HOA lady?" she asked one morning, finding me at my post by the window. "Jack, this is insane." "It's not insane, it's strategic," I told her. "She wants to play dirty. Fine, I'll play dirty, but I'll do it smarter." My neighbor Derek became an unwitting source of intelligence. He loved to talk, and all I had to do was stand on my lawn for 5 minutes, and he'd wander over with a new story about Karen's latest outrage. "You hear what she did to the Garcias?" he asked me one afternoon, leaning over our shared fence. "Fined them $200 because their kid's birthday party had a bouncy castle. Said it violated the Temporary Structures Ordinance. A bouncy castle, man, for a 7-year-old's party. The woman's heart is a lump of coal." I'd nod and listen, filing away every piece of information. The Garcias, the Millers, the basketball hoop. It wasn't just me she was targeting. It was everyone. She was a blight on the whole community. But they were all too scared to do anything. They'd complain to each other, but they wouldn't stand up to her. I knew I needed more than just stories. I needed hard evidence. I needed a weapon. That meant I needed to get inside the castle. I needed to see the HOA's books. The HOA website was a joke. It had a few pictures of smiling families and a link to the bylaws, but nothing of substance. The financial reports, the meeting minutes, all of that was kept under lock and key, accessible only to board members. I had to find a way in. I started attending the monthly HOA meetings. They were held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with folding chairs and the faint smell of chlorine from the nearby pool. The first meeting was a nightmare. Karen sat at a long table at the front, flanked by her goon, whose name I learned was Frank, and a mousy-looking treasurer who looked terrified of his own shadow. Karen ran the meeting like a dictator. She'd shout down anyone who questioned her, her voice sharp and condescending. She dismissed concerns about rising dues and arbitrary fines with a wave of her hand. "It's all for the good of the community," she'd say, her smile never reaching her eyes. I sat in the back, silent, observing, learning the names and faces, seeing who was loyal to her and who was just too afraid to speak up. During the third meeting, I saw my opening. The treasurer, a man named Arthur, was giving a rambling, confusing report about the budget. He kept fumbling with a stack of papers, his hands shaking. Karen watched him with undisguised contempt. When he was done, she snatched the papers from him and tossed them into a cardboard box under the table. "Thank you, Arthur, for that report," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I watched that box. After the meeting, as everyone was milling around eating stale cookies, Karen and Frank were busy holding court, soaking up the praise from their few allies. Arthur, the treasurer, scurried out of the room like a frightened mouse, leaving the box of financial documents sitting there, unguarded. This was it. My heart started pounding. It was a risk, a huge one. But sometimes you have to take the shot you're given. I needed a distraction. I caught Derek's eye from across the room. He was trying to balance a cookie and a cup of punch and was failing miserably. I walked over to him. "Derek," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need a favor. I need you to create a scene. Something big. Right now." He looked at me, his eyes wide behind his crooked glasses. "A scene? What kind of scene?" "I don't care. Spill your punch on Frank. Pretend to have a heart attack. Just get everyone's attention for 60 seconds. Derek looked from me to Karen and Frank, and then back to me. A slow grin spread across his face. "You got it, buddy," he said. He took a deep breath, and with a theatrical gasp, he clutched his chest and yelled, "My petunias! Has anyone seen my prize-winning petunias?" Before flinging his entire cup of bright red punch directly onto Frank's clean white shirt. The room erupted. Frank bellowed in rage. Karen shrieked. Everyone's attention swiveled to the drama. That was all I needed. In the chaos, I walked calmly to the front of the room, knelt down, and slipped the entire stack of financial reports out of the box and into the empty tote bag Mary had sent with me to bring back cookies. I stood up and walked straight out the door. No one even noticed. I got home, my heart hammering against my ribs, and spread the papers out on my dining room table. It took me less than 10 minutes to find it. A monthly payment for $5,000 made out to a company called Evergreen Landscaping Solutions. I'd never seen a single evergreen truck in our neighborhood. I pulled out my phone and looked up the company. It was a shell corporation, and the registered agent, the owner, was listed as K. Blake. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't about power. This wasn't about fines. This was embezzlement. She was stealing from all of us. The game had just changed, and the stakes were higher than I ever could have imagined. The papers on my dining room table were a declaration of war. It wasn't just a stack of financial reports anymore. It was ammunition. I stared at the name Evergreen Landscaping Solutions and the address, which was just a P.O. box in the next town over. $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year. And that was just the one I'd found so far. How long had this been going on? How much had she taken? The anger was back, cold and sharp. This woman wasn't just a bully. She was a common thief, wrapping her crimes in the legitimacy of an HOA. My military mind kicked into gear, processing the new intelligence. Threat assessment elevated. The enemy was no longer just a petty tyrant. She was a criminal. Criminals get desperate when they're cornered. Desperate people are dangerous. I had to be careful. Mary came into the room, a worried frown on her face. She looked at the papers spread across the table, then at me. "What is all that, Jack? You look like you're planning an invasion." "In a way I am," I said, and I showed her the invoice. I pointed to the name on the Shell Corporation registration. Her eyes went wide. She sank into a chair, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She's stealing from us, from everyone." "She's been doing it for a while, it looks like," I said, my voice grim. "This is organized. This is a real crime, Mary, a felony." We sat in silence for a minute, the weight of it settling in the room. The quiet neighborhood, the peaceful life we'd sought, it was all a facade. Underneath, there was a rot, a corruption that was poisoning the whole community. "We have to go to the police," Mary said, her voice firming up. The fear in her eyes was being replaced by indignation. That was my Mary, headstrong and loyal, with a core of steel. I'm not sure, I said, thinking it through. We go to the cops. This becomes a legal mess. It could take years. She'll lawyer up. She'll claim it's a misunderstanding, a clerical error. Her word against a stack of papers I technically stole. They might just call it a civil matter and tell us to sue her. I paced the room, the old instincts taking over. She controls the board. She controls the narrative. If we make a move and fail, she'll come after us with everything she's got. She'll make our lives a living hell until we're forced to sell the house and leave. I stopped pacing and looked at Mary. This is what she does. She breaks people. We can't just fire a warning shot. When we move, it has to be a kill shot. We have to take her down so hard and so fast she doesn't have time to retaliate. Mary looked at me, a deep concern in her eyes. Jack, listen to yourself. Kill shot. This isn't one of your missions. This is our home. She made it a mission the second she targeted my family and my home. I shot back, my voice tighter than I intended. I took a breath, trying to rein in the soldier and let the husband speak. I'm sorry, but she's the enemy, and you have to treat an enemy with respect. You have to assume they're smart and ruthless. We need more than just this. I tapped the invoice. This is the bullet, but we need the gun. We need something so undeniable that the police will have no choice but to act immediately. We need something that turns the entire neighborhood against her in an instant. I started thinking out loud, piecing together a plan. She's arrogant. That's her weakness. She thinks she's untouchable. We can use that against her. We need to catch her in the act. We need to expose not just the crime, but the person. We need to show everyone who she really is. The idea started to form in my mind, a risky multi-stage operation. It would involve deception, technology, and perfect timing. It felt familiar. It felt right. But a part of me hesitated. This was a line. I had come to Willow Creek to leave this part of myself behind. The part that planned, that strategized, that thought in terms of targets and objectives. I had promised Mary a life of peace, not a suburban covert operation. Was I doing this to protect our home? Or was I doing it because, deep down, this was the only way I knew how to solve a problem? Was I becoming the very thing I was trying to escape? I looked at the dog ramp I'd built for Max, a simple act of love and care. Then I looked at the financial documents, a blueprint of greed and corruption. The choice was clear. You can't have peace when there's a wolf among the sheep. Sometimes to protect the flock, you have to become a wolf yourself. Okay, I said to Mary, my decision made. Here's what we're going to do. The path ahead was dangerous, and there was no turning back. I had my evidence, but now I needed a trap. And I knew just how to build one. The plan was simple, but it had to be executed perfectly. Karen's arrogance was her center of gravity. I needed to use it to throw her off balance. My first move was to appear defeated. The next morning, I ostentatiously dismantled the dog ramp. I made sure to do it in the middle of the day, when I knew she'd be making her rounds. I saw her golf cart slow as it passed my house, a smug little smile on her face. She thought she'd won. She thought I was another sheep falling into line. That was exactly what I wanted. Step one was complete. The enemy felt secure. Now, it was time to bait the trap. I knew she was stealing money through fake landscaping invoices, so I decided to give her a landscaping problem she couldn't ignore. That weekend, Mary and I went to a nursery and bought the most obnoxious, garish, and explicitly non-bylaw compliant garden gnome I could find. It was a 3-foot-tall monstrosity, riding a unicorn and holding a fishing pole. It was a masterpiece of bad taste. We planted it right in the middle of our front lawn, next to a newly installed and deliberately wobbly pink plastic flamingo. Derek saw it from his yard and nearly choked on his coffee. He came scurrying over, a look of horrified glee on his face. "Dude," he whispered, "are you insane? Karen is going to have an aneurysm. This is like waving a red flag at a bull that's already on fire." "That's the idea, Derek," I said with a grin. "Just play along." As predicted, less than an hour later, a notice was pinned to my front door. It was practically vibrating with fury. It cited 3 different bylaws I was violating and gave me 12 hours to remove the offensive statuary or face a $500 fine. I left it there. I let the 12 hours pass. I let the next day pass. I was dangling the bait. I knew what would happen next. She couldn't just fine me. Her ego wouldn't allow it. She had to make an example of me. She would have to have the items removed herself. And since her beloved Evergreen Landscaping Solutions didn't actually exist, she'd have to send her only real employee, Frank the Goon. This was the core of the plan. I had purchased a set of high-definition, motion-activated security cameras, the kind that looked like little birds nested in the trees. I placed one with a perfect view of my front lawn and another aimed directly at my mailbox. I had a gut feeling about the mailbox. A woman this controlling wouldn't be able to resist seeing the angry letters she assumed I was getting from the HOA. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait. For 2 days, nothing happened. The gnome and the flamingo stood their silent, tacky watch. I started to get nervous. Had I miscalculated? Had she decided to just fine me into oblivion instead? Mary was a nervous wreck. "Maybe we should just take it down, Jack," she said on the second night. "This is too much." "Just one more day," I told her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Trust me, the next morning, it happened. My phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m. Motion detected, front yard. I leaped out of bed and went to my computer, pulling up the live camera feed. The night vision was crystal clear. A dark van with no markings had pulled up to the curb. The passenger door opened, and Frank got out. He moved like a thief in the night, casting nervous glances up and down the empty street. He stomped onto my lawn, grabbed the gnome and the flamingo, and hauled them back to the van. Mission accomplished for him. But then he hesitated. He looked around again, then walked straight to my mailbox. My heart was pounding. This was it. He opened the little metal door and reached inside. He pulled out the bundle of mail, flipping through it with a small flashlight. I saw him find what he was looking for. 2 more official-looking envelopes from the HOA that I had asked Derek to mail to me as part of the plan. He didn't just look at them. He opened them. He read them. Then, he took my entire bundle of mail, walked back to the van, and got in. The van drove off, disappearing into the darkness. I had it. I had it all on high-definition video. Vandalism, theft of private property, and the big one, tampering with and stealing United States mail, a federal offense. I saved the video file, making 3 separate backup copies. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. It was the feeling of a successful operation. I showed the footage to Mary. She watched in stunned silence, her eyes wide. "He stole our mail," she breathed. "I can't believe it. She actually sent him to steal our mail." "She's desperate," I said. She wanted to see if her threats were working. She wanted to know what our next move was. And in doing so, she just handed me the weapon I needed. The original plan had been to use the video of the gnome theft to get her in trouble for property damage. But this was a game changer. Mail theft was FBI territory. This went far beyond the little kingdom of Willow Creek. A cold, hard satisfaction settled over me. Karen Blake thought she was playing checkers, moving her little pieces around our quiet suburban board. She had no idea I was playing chess, and I had just put her king in check. But as I watched the footage again, a strange detail caught my eye. Just as the van pulled away, the streetlight caught the reflection in its back window. For just a split second, I saw the driver. It wasn't Karen. It was someone I recognized, someone I never would have suspected. And the entire chessboard tilted on its axis. I rewound the video, my finger hitting the pause button at the exact right second. I zoomed in, enhancing the image as much as the software would allow. The face in the driver's seat was grainy, distorted by the darkness and the reflection, but it was unmistakable. It was Arthur, the mousy, terrified HOA treasurer. Arthur always appeared nervous at meetings, but it wasn't anxiety. It was guilt. Guilt hides in plain sight. The man who looked like he was afraid of his own shadow. He was driving the getaway van for Frank. My mind reeled. It didn't make any sense. Arthur was a victim, a pawn. I'd seen the way Karen treated him, the contempt she had for him. Why would he be her accomplice in the middle of the night? I played the video again and again, trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was just someone who looked like him. But the more I looked, the more certain I was. The slumped shoulders, the shape of his head, the nervous way he held the steering wheel. It was Arthur. I pulled out the financial documents I had taken from the clubhouse. I had been so focused on Karen's shell company, Evergreen Landscaping, that I had barely glanced at the rest. Now, I went through them line by line, my military training and analysis kicking in. I wasn't just looking for fraud anymore. I was looking for a pattern, a connection. And then I found it. It was subtle. A series of small but consistent payments for community website maintenance to a company I'd never heard of. The payments were only a few $100s a month, small enough to fly under the radar. But they'd been happening for years. On a hunch, I did a business search on this web company. The registered agent was Arthur's wife. It was his own shell company. He wasn't just Karen's victim. He was her partner. The whole picture snapped into focus with sickening clarity. This wasn't Karen's scheme alone. This was a partnership. She was the muscle, the public face of the tyranny. She created the chaos, levied the fines, and intimidated the residents. Arthur, the quiet man in the background, was the brains. He was the one cooking the books, hiding the transactions, and making sure the money trail was just confusing enough to avoid scrutiny. The Evergreen Company was probably his idea. He handled the digital side, she handled the dirty work. They were a team. My image of him as a frightened little mouse evaporated. He wasn't a mouse. He was a snake, hiding in the grass. His whole persona, the shaking hands, the fumbling reports, it was an act, a brilliant one. He had fooled everyone, including me. He had made himself invisible, letting Karen draw all the fire, while he quietly siphoned off funds right alongside her. This changed everything. My plan had been to expose Karen, to isolate her, and cut her out like a cancer. But the cancer was deeper than I thought. It had spread. If I just went after Karen with the mail theft video, Arthur would scurry back into the shadows. He'd destroy evidence, cover his tracks, and live to steal another day. He might even be able to pin the whole financial mess on Karen, playing the part of the innocent treasurer who was duped by his domineering boss. I couldn't let that happen. True justice meant taking them both down. I now had leverage on Frank for the theft, and by extension, Karen for ordering it. But I had nothing solid on Arthur except a grainy video and a suspicious business registration. It wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to connect him directly to the bigger crime, the embezzlement. A new, more dangerous plan began to form in my mind. I needed to get inside Arthur's house. I needed to get to his computer, where I was sure the real books, the undoctored records of their entire scheme, were hidden. This was a massive escalation. This wasn't just setting a trap on my own property anymore. This was breaking and entering. This wasn't foreign soil. This was my neighborhood. But war had taught me the rules blur when protecting family. This was a line I had never thought I would cross. I looked at Mary, who was sleeping peacefully in our bed, oblivious to the new, darker twist in our suburban war. I thought about the promise I had made her, the quiet life I was supposed to provide. To get that peace, was I willing to commit a crime myself? To become the very thing I was fighting against? The question echoed in the silent house. How far was I willing to go to defend my own? The answer came back, cold and clear, from the part of me I had tried so hard to bury. All the way. My mission had a new objective: secure Arthur's computer. And I knew there was only one person crazy enough to help me pull it off. I was going to need Derek and his talent for creating chaos one more time. The next phase of the operation felt like a return to my old life. The stakes were high, the margin for error was zero, and the objective was behind enemy lines. I needed to get into Arthur's house, access his computer, and get out with the evidence, all without leaving a trace. I spent a full day just watching his house from a distance, mapping his and his wife's routines. They were creatures of habit. They left for work at the same time every morning. They came home at the same time every evening. And every Tuesday night, like clockwork, they went to a bingo game at the town hall. That was my window, 1 hour, maybe 90 minutes, on Tuesday night. It wasn't much. I needed a plan, and I needed an accomplice. I went over to Derek's house that afternoon. He was trying to assemble a new barbecue grill in his backyard, and it was not going well. There were bolts and brackets scattered all over his patio. "Derek," I said, getting straight to the point, "I need your help, and it's not for a punch-spilling distraction. This is serious." He looked up from the incomprehensible instructions, wiping grease from his forehead. "What's up, man? You look like you're about to invade Poland." I told him everything. I told him about Arthur being the driver. I told him about the shell company and his wife's name. I told him my theory, that Arthur was the real mastermind, and Karen was just the attack dog. Derek listened, his usual goofy expression slowly replaced by a look of grim focus. He pushed his crooked glasses up his nose. "So, the little weasel is the big cheese," he muttered. "I never would have guessed. That's some next-level sneaky." "I need to get into his house, Derek. I need to get onto his computer. I think that's where the real ledger is, but I can't do it alone. I need a lookout." I expected him to say no. I was asking him to be an accessory to a crime. It was a huge risk, but he didn't even hesitate. "I'm in," he said. "Those people have been making life miserable for this whole neighborhood for years. The bouncy castle, my petunias. Okay, the petunias weren't them, that was rabbits. But the point is, they deserve what's coming to them. What's the plan?" My respect for the gangly man in front of me grew tenfold. He wasn't just a comic relief neighbor. He had a spine of steel. The plan was simple, a classic two-man infiltration. On Tuesday night, after Arthur and his wife left for bingo, Derek would be positioned at the end of the street with a walkie-talkie, acting as our eyes and ears. I would go in. I had a set of lockpicks from my army days, a skill I never thought I'd use in a quiet suburb. I would get in through the back door, find the computer, download the files onto a thumb drive, and get out. We timed the whole operation. I had to be in and out in under 10 minutes. Tuesday night arrived heavy with tension. Mary was a nervous wreck, pacing the kitchen. "This is crazy, Jack. What if you get caught?" "I won't," I said, trying to reassure her, and myself. "I've done things like this 100 times. It was a lie. I'd never done anything like this. I'd entered buildings in war zones, but I'd never broken into a neighbor's house. Derek and I synchronized our watches. He gave me a firm nod. "Be safe in there, buddy." I watched from the shadows as Arthur and his wife pulled out of their driveway. The moment their car turned the corner, the clock started. I moved quickly, sticking to the darkest parts of the yards, a ghost in the manicured landscape of Willow Creek. I reached the back of Arthur's house. The yard was dark. I pulled on a pair of thin leather gloves and took out my picks. The lock on the back door was cheap, standard issue. It took me less than 30 seconds. The soft click of the bolt sliding open was the loudest sound in the world. I slipped inside. The house was clean, sterile, and impersonal. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a stage. I found Arthur's office immediately. It was as neat and tidy as the rest of the house. The computer was on a small desk, humming softly. I pulled out my thumb drive, a special one that had software to quickly search and copy files based on keywords. I plugged it in. As the software started running, searching for terms like evergreen, HOA, invoice, and Karen, I heard a crackle from the walkie-talkie on my belt. It was Derek's voice, hushed and frantic. "Jack! Red light! Red light! A car just pulled into the driveway. It's them! They came back! Get out of there now!" My blood ran cold. They must have forgotten something. I didn't have time to wait for the file transfer. I yanked the thumb drive out of the computer, praying it had copied at least something useful. I could hear a key turning in the front door lock. There was no time to get out the back. I had one option. The office had a large window that looked out onto the side yard. It was my only escape route. I slid the window open just as I heard the front door swing open and Arthur's voice call out, "I'm sure I left my wallet on the hall table." I dove out the window, rolling as I hit the soft grass of the lawn, and scrambled behind a large azalea bush. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I had made it out. But I had no idea if I had the evidence I needed or if I had just risked everything for nothing. I lay there in the bushes, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, as the lights in the house flicked on. I could hear Arthur and his wife moving around inside, their voices muffled. I risked a peek. Arthur was standing in his office, looking at the computer. He tilted his head, a slight frown on his face. Did he notice something? Was the screen different? Did I leave a footprint? Then he shrugged, picked a wallet up off his desk, and walked out of the room. The lights went off, the front door closed and locked, and the car pulled out of the driveway again. They were gone. I waited another 5 minutes, my nerves screaming, before I slipped out from behind the bush and made my way back home, a shadow moving through the night. Derek was waiting for me in his yard, looking pale. "Man, I thought they had you," he breathed, his voice shaky. "That was way too close." "You and me both," I said, my own voice hoarse. I got back to my house, and Mary rushed to me, her face etched with worry. "Are you okay? What happened?" "They came back," I said. "I got out, but I don't know what I have." I went straight to my computer, my hands still unsteady, and plugged in the thumb drive. A small window popped up. File transfer incomplete. My heart sank. But some files had copied before I'd yanked the drive. I opened the folder. It was a mess of partial downloads and corrupted data. Most of it was useless. I clicked through file after file, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. It had all been for nothing. And then I saw it. One file had transferred completely. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a ledger. It was a video file. The file name was just a string of numbers. I double-clicked it. The video opened. It was clearly filmed on a hidden camera, positioned in the corner of a room, looking down at a desk. The room was Arthur's office. I could see the edge of his computer monitor. The timestamp in the corner of the video was from 6 months ago. The video showed Arthur sitting at his desk, but he wasn't alone. Karen was there, standing over him, her arms crossed. They weren't arguing. They were talking in low, conspiratorial tones. The audio was clear. "The reserves are getting too low," Arthur was saying. "We need a new influx of cash. The landscaping scam isn't going to be enough." "Then we start phase 2, Karen said, her voice cold and decisive. "We start pushing harder. More fines, more violations. We make it uncomfortable. We target the ones with older homes, the ones on fixed incomes. We make them miserable enough to sell." Arthur nodded. "The developer is getting impatient. He wants to start buying up the properties by the end of the year. He said he'll pay our full bonus if we can deliver at least 10 houses in the first quarter." My jaw dropped. This was so much bigger than embezzlement. They weren't just stealing our HOA dues. They were systematically trying to destroy the lives of their neighbors, to force them out of their homes. Also, some faceless developer could get the land cheap. It was a conspiracy to gut our entire community from the inside out. My anger at Karen and Arthur was suddenly dwarfed by a tidal wave of protective fury for my neighbors, the Garcias and their bouncy castle, the Millers and their beige paint. It wasn't random cruelty. It was a targeted campaign. They were deliberately creating misery for profit. And the biggest twist of all, the one that made my blood run cold, came at the end of the short video clip. The developer, the one they were working for, Karen mentioned his name. It was a name I knew. It was the man who had built the entire Willow Creek subdivision 20 years ago. The respected old philanthropist whose name was on the community clubhouse and the park down the street. He wasn't a retired benefactor. He was a predator trying to buy back his own creation for pennies on the dollar, and he was using Karen and Arthur as his attack dogs. We weren't just fighting our HOA president. We were fighting the man who had founded our town. Looking back, it made sense. The constant inspections, the push to sell, the oddities suddenly fell into place. The whole system, the whole community, was built on a lie. This was the weapon. This was the kill shot I'd been looking for. It was better than financial records. It was better than mail theft. It was a confession. It was proof of a vast, cruel conspiracy that implicated not just Karen and Arthur, but one of the most powerful men in the county. The final HOA meeting of the year was scheduled for the next night. It was supposed to be a Christmas celebration, a festive gathering. I was going to turn it into a day of reckoning. I copied the video from the thumb drive. I copied the footage of Frank stealing my mail. I printed out the records of Karen's shell company. I put it all together into a single, devastating presentation. There would be no more hiding, no more sneaking around. Tomorrow night, in front of the entire community, I was going to burn their whole corrupt empire to the ground. Mary stood beside me, watching the video on my screen, her fear gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger that matched my own. "Do it, Jack," she said, her voice like steel. "End this." And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that's exactly what I was going to do. The community clubhouse was decked out in tinsel and cheap holiday decorations. A sad-looking Christmas tree blinked in the corner. People were milling around, drinking eggnog from C's plastic cups and making awkward small talk. The air was thick with forced cheerfulness. Karen and Arthur stood at the front of the room, playing their parts perfectly. Karen was the gracious queen, wishing everyone a happy holiday. Arthur was the quiet, efficient treasurer, handing out pamphlets for the new year. They looked so normal, so respectable. The sight of them, knowing what I knew, made my stomach turn. I had a projector and a laptop in a bag over my shoulder. Mary was beside me, her hand gripping mine. Derek gave me a nervous thumbs up from across the room, where he was standing near the light switch, ready for his cue. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of anger, of sleepless nights. This was the showdown. Karen tapped the microphone, a high-pitched squeal echoing through the room. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, her voice radiating false warmth. "We have a few small items of business to discuss before we get to the cookie exchange." She launched into a speech about community spirit and togetherness that was so hypocritical it was almost funny. I let her talk. I wanted the whole neighborhood to be listening. I wanted them to hear her lies one last time before I shattered the illusion forever. When she finished, she asked if there was any new business. That was my opening. I raised my hand. Karen's eyes found me, and her smile tightened. "Yes, Mr. Jack," she said, her tone condescending. "Do you have a concern about the color of the tinsel?" A few of her cronies snickered. I walked to the front of the room, setting my laptop on the table. "Actually, Karen, I have a presentation." Before she could object, I plugged my laptop into the projector. Derek hit the lights, and the room plunged into darkness, except for the bright rectangle of light that now filled the large screen on the wall. "What is the meaning of this?" Karen sputtered. The first image that flashed up was a crystal-clear, high-definition still frame from my security camera. It was Frank, my gnome in one hand and my flamingo in the other, standing on my lawn in the dead of night. A gasp went through the crowd. "This is Frank, our HOA's head of maintenance," I said, my voice calm and loud in the silent room. "Performing some community service on my property at 3 a.m. I clicked to the next slide. It was the video of Frank rifling through my mailbox. "Here he is again," I said as the video played, "committing a federal offense, stealing my mail on Karen's orders." The room was dead silent now. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, on the screen, on Karen. Her face was pale, a mask of disbelief. "This is doctored footage! Slander!" she shrieked. Frank, who was standing near the back, started to move toward me. He was big, but I was faster. I met him halfway. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't need to. I used a simple joint lock technique I'd learned 20 years ago. I controlled his wrist and elbow, used his own momentum against him, and put him on the floor with a loud thud. He grunted in pain, his arm pinned behind him. "Stay down," I said, my voice low. He stayed down. I walked back to the front, my heart hammering, and looked out at the sea of shocked faces. "It gets worse," I said. I showed them the Evergreen landscaping invoices. I showed them the proof it was a shell company owned by Karen. I showed them Arthur's fake web maintenance company. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, turning from shock to anger. Then, for the grand finale, I played the video, the hidden camera footage from Arthur's office. The room was so quiet you could hear the projector whirring as they all listened to Karen and Arthur's voices conspire to drive their own neighbors from their homes. They heard them mention the developer. They heard them plotting to destroy their community for a payday. When the video ended, I brought up the lights. The room exploded. It was chaos. People were shouting, yelling at Karen and Arthur, who were backed against the wall, their faces a mixture of terror and fury. Several people had their phones out and were calling the police. Karen tried to scream over the noise, tried to lie, to deflect, but it was useless. The truth was out. Her power, built on fear and intimidation, had evaporated in an instant. She was just a common criminal, exposed in front of everyone she had terrorized. I saw Arthur make a break for a side door, but a group of angry homeowners, led by the man whose basketball hoop had been taken down, blocked his path. It was over. The whole corrupt system had come crashing down. I saw Mary across the room, her eyes filled with tears of relief. Derek gave me a wide, triumphant grin. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. I looked at Karen's face, contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. She wasn't a president anymore. She wasn't a queen. She was just a desperate woman whose world had just ended. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back our peace. And as the first police officer walked through the door, I knew, for the first time in a very long time, that the war was finally over. In the end, it was swift. The evidence was too overwhelming to fight. With dozens of witnesses, video proof of multiple crimes, and the financial data, Karen and Arthur had no way out. The local police handled the property theft, but the mail tampering and the conspiracy to commit fraud kicked it up to a federal level. The FBI got involved. The developer, the town's founding father, tried to deny everything, but the paper trail Arthur had unknowingly preserved on his computer was undeniable. His reputation was ruined overnight, and he was facing a mountain of lawsuits from the residents he had conspired against. Karen and Arthur both took plea deals to avoid longer sentences, but they didn't escape justice. They faced prison time, and the court ordered them to pay massive amounts in restitution to the HOA, repaying every stolen dollar. Frank, for his cooperation, got off with probation. The neighborhood was in shock for weeks, but it was a good kind of shock. It was the feeling of a fever breaking. People started talking to each other again, not in hushed whispers about Karen, but in the open. A special election was held, and Derek, of all people, was voted in as the new HOA president. His first official act was to abolish 90% of the stupid rules Karen had created. His second was to throw a neighborhood-wide barbecue, paid for by the first restitution check that arrived from the court. Mary and I sat on our back porch a few weeks later. The sun was setting over the pond, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Max was snoozing at my feet, right next to the brand new, permanent, and very sturdy ramp I had built for him. It was quiet. It was the real quiet this time, not the fake quiet that had been hiding a secret war. It was a deep, earned peace. Derek came over, carrying 3 beers. He handed one to me and one to Mary, and we sat there, just watching the day end. "You know," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "for a guy who just wanted a quiet life, you sure know how to make a lot of noise." I laughed. It was a real laugh from the gut. "Sometimes you have to get loud to make things quiet again," I said. Mary leaned her head on my shoulder. She was right. This was our home, and I had learned something through all of this. I'd spent my whole life fighting for my country, for abstract ideas of freedom and safety. But the fight that mattered most was the one for my own front yard. The question of how far a man will go to defend his own had been answered. You go as far as you have to. You use every skill you have, every bit of strength and cunning, not just to protect your family, but to protect your peace. Because in the end, that's the only ground worth holding, and it was finally ours.